A new explosive report from Vanity Fair uncovers more revelations into the origins of COVID mystery. The report extracts from more than 100,000 leaked documents and details how, quote, an organization dedicated to preventing the next pandemic found itself suspected of helping start one.
Vanity Fair contributing editor and author of A Bottle of Lies, the inside story of the generic drug boom. Katherine Eban is here to discuss. Welcome, Katherine. Thanks for having me. And first of all, terrific work. You've been on this beat for a while now, but this was excellent piece of journalism. And if you could just flesh out for people what you think are the key takeaways.
Well, I think for me, reporting this, the key takeaway is really that the NIH, which through a subgrant funded research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, never seemed particularly interested in getting to the bottom of where COVID came from. And there is evidence that they set out to construct a single narrative, which is that it came from a market and from an animal and from a zoonotic incident. But there were, questions at the highest levels of government about whether their COVID could have originated from some kind of a lab incident in Wuhan. The CDC director, Redfield, raised those questions, but yet in meetings, in discussions, and confidential emails, there is real evidence that they kept on, excluding the possibility of a lab leak from consideration in order to enshrine a single narrative.
One of the more striking revelations from the investigation is how evolutionary biologist Jesse Bloom had written a preprint, a study that was not yet peer-reviewed or published, containing sensitive admissions about the National Institutes of Health. Quote, Bloom's paper was the product of detective work he'd undertaken after noticing that a number of early SARS-CoV-2 genomic sequences mentioned in a published paper from China had somehow vanished without a trace. The sequences, which map the nucleotides that give a virus its unique genetic identity, are key to tracking when the virus emerged and how it might have evolved.
And so the report goes on to read, quote, in Bloom's view, their disappearance raised the possibility that the Chinese government might be trying to hide evidence about the pandemic's early spread. Piecing together clues, Bloom established that the NIH itself had deleted the sequences from its own archive at the request of researchers in Wuhan. Now, he was hoping Fauci and his boss, NIH Director Francis Collins, could help him identify other deleted sequences that might shed light on the mystery. And so you write about this conference call that happens between Bloom and Fauci and Collins, and you say that they were each allowed to have seconds, which sort of felt like an old school duel, which is an unusual way to get to the bottom of a scientific mystery, to have a conference call duel. So tell us a little bit about how that conference call went and why it's so important.
Yeah. So, Bloom thinks he is getting on this Zoom call so that there can be a scientific collaboration into the question of these missing sequences. And instead, he is hit with this wall of hostility about why he's undertaking this research, how it's unethical to even examine these sequences if the Chinese researchers wanted them deleted. And then one of the scientists in attendance, Christian Anderson, makes this extraordinary suggestion to him, which is that he is a screener at this preprint server, and he can delete or revise the preprint without evidence of his having done so. And Bloom says, given the contentious nature of this meeting, none of those suggestions seem appropriate. Bloom ends up so troubled about what happened at this meeting that he documents it in a detailed account, which I obtained and is embedded in the report. So the question is, why weren't they interested in looking at sequences that maybe could shed light on the origins of COVID?
And Fauci's response that you include in your story was pretty fascinating. Like he says, after, I guess, kind of the dust has settled from this kind of outburst, he says, just for the record, I want it noted that I did not ask you to edit your article. Like it seemed.
Yeah.
So what was your understanding? What did you take away from that kind of line from Fauci?
Well, I mean, it was clear that apparently both Fauci and Collins, according to Bloom's account, said something to that effect. So my interpretation of that is after reading the room, they want to make clear to Bloom that they're not advocating for something that could be perceived as, a cover-up of some sort. But, why the meeting was structured in this way is really a question. Why isn't the NIH leading the inquiry into where COVID came from as opposed to circling the wagons? I mean, that's really the issue here.
Yeah, and this is, I think, what you're reporting suggests that it goes beyond just a sort of ignorance, like this was not a possibility, so we're not going to explore it, but starts to get into we don't want to discover the truth, or figures involved in this acting like they wouldn't want to discover the truth because it might reflect badly on them.
It's hard to avoid that conclusion. It is clear to me that scientists some top scientists have felt like the answer could potentially implicate science, and they are very keen to shift the narrative. Either that or they simply just don't want the questions being asked. The fact is there's tremendous uncertainty. Nobody's got some sort of smoking gun in hand. Nobody's got an infected animal in hand that can make all of this clear. So in the interim, there are very uncomfortable questions being asked about science, about scientific funding, about how much visibility the NIH or EcoHealth Alliance, this nonprofit I write about, how much visibility they had into what was going on at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The answer is probably not as much as they think.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show, but that's something else that you shed some new light on, that it seems as if what was going on inside that laboratory was a bit more of a black box than Daszak and some of the other scientists had previously led on. What did you hear from EcoHealth Alliance staff, former staff, about what may have been possible, inside that lab?
Yeah. So I interviewed 5 former EcoHealth Alliance staffers, and as one of them told me, Peter Daszak did not have as much visibility into what went on at the WIV as he let on. They had a Chinese national working at EcoHealth Alliance whose job was to sort of interpret for them what was happening in the laboratory. But that person didn't have full visibility. And basically, EcoHealth Alliance, which is the entity that is providing these subgrants to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, it's their job to ensure that the grant money coming from the NIH is being used appropriately, that safeguards are being followed. This staffer basically said, well, we just had to take their word for it. That this was based on a relationship between the lead coronavirus researcher at the WIV, Shizheng Li, and Peter Daszak, who was the president of EcoHealth Alliance. And the attitude was, trust us, because they had this longstanding relationship.
Trust us.
and so as you think about it, where do you come down at this point, having looked into this for so long, if you were kind of forced to guess at the origin?
I have some thoughts about it. I won't really go beyond what is in the article because that is really what we're able to print and ensure the accuracy of. So, but it's clear to me that there has been a significant lack of transparency at the top levels of science in the U.S. I will say that.
Katherine, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
We'll have more Rising right after this.